Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, everyone, welcome back to Nets in the Water. My name is John Barreto. I was trying to stoke the flame of Catholic education. It's a podcast for educators, but educators in the broadest sense. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I'm very excited today to have John Cannon on. John, thank you so much for coming on today.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah, very grateful for you to come on. You have a crazy interesting story. And then on top of that, I'm excited to get into these 6 attributes of the entrepreneurship of the great founders of religious orders and movements within the church. But before we get into that, your story's crazy. So you were born, was it Michigan you were born in?
Born in Alabama originally.
Alabama, that's right. You're born in Alabama. Your dad was a doctor.
Correct, yeah.
And then, maybe you can run me through this a little bit. So your dad was a doctor.
Yep. Grew up in Alabama, born and raised. Just was blessed to have a lot of amazing opportunities go to great schools like Notre Dame. Maybe that's where the confusion with Michigan because they were rivals in football or something, similar colors. But
I'm sure that was a dagger when I mixed that up. I'm sorry.
No worries. And then I was able to, just had a lot of great opportunities growing up. So I was able to go to places like Oxford and Harvard for school and worked in investment banking, worked in politics for a little bit. And I grew up Catholic, but it became less and less part of the game, I guess, as I went along, and never really had like tons of catechesis growing up, but I, and eventually kind of just started chasing success and career objectives and, getting into the best schools. And I think that the game plan was working a little bit, but I think internally I just wasn't satisfied. I wasn't really happy. And it's kind of started taking on a work hard, play hard lifestyle. So it'd like work hard during the day and start partying at night, a couple nights a week. Then it was 4 nights a week. Then it was 6 nights a week. And then, I was just not in a good place internally, spiritually or psychologically. And God was really merciful with me. About a year after I went to business school, I had this very intense encounter with him, I would say. And it just changed everything. Like it was the most powerful experience of my life, this spiritual experience. And it was like crying and it was, and I remember thinking after that, I was like, I know God exists and I'm a sinner and he's inviting me to change. And overnight went from reading just business stuff, political things, to just tearing through spiritual books. And it became kind of an all-consuming journey for me, and ended up spending more time in prayer, found a lot of healing and confession, going to mass every day because I needed that. I needed him. And eventually ended up entering religious life. I joined the Carmelites, which is a more contemplative order in the church. So I lived in monasteries after that for about 7 years in the Western U.S. and loved it. Was very happy there overall, I would say. But as I went along, I felt like God was inviting me to kind of dig up these active gifts I had, and then eventually ended up discerning out, and we can get into some stuff I was started working on. But
just so we don't brush past this, you went to Oxford and then Harvard Business School.
Yep.
And then, I say that to emphasize it. I feel like I often joke about this in a different respect of like, if you know a really good looking dude who's like choosing to become a priest, and I'm like, dude, like you could have done.
You say I'm not a good looking dude?
You could have done whatever. No, dude, that's what I was getting to. No, but like it's a similar analogy of like you had the whole world in front of you in terms of like business success, financial success. Nothing inherently wrong with it, but to still choose to divert that. Also a good looking dude. You're jacked.
Okay, here we go.
You're jacked. Can you flex for the You're jacked. And no. Either way though, there's a level of witness that's very powerful of like, okay, you could have done anything you wanted to do essentially in the business world. To choose to give that up, so to speak, for the Lord, and then spent 7 years in this deeply contemplative life, Carmelite life, just intimate with the Lord, as you guys would put it, in a way that I'm sure has formed you so well for what you're doing now. Were you influenced by Carmelites when you were growing up? How did you get?
I didn't know about the Carmelites at all growing up.
To be so locked into like monastic life.
I didn't know about the Carmelites at all. I didn't know much about. I barely read scripture. I didn't know much about Catholic spirituality, or I didn't have much catechesis. My dad was a deeply spiritual guy, and I kind of always was attracted to that, but I didn't have that for myself. And but after this conversion experience, it was so powerful. Like I was like, I know God exists, and I experienced some aspect of him. And I think he let me see within me this like, almost like, I remember thinking like I saw this like cancer within me that needed to be excised, needed to be cut out. And, once I don't know, once you see or experience something like that, you can't unsee it. And so I just knew deep in the core of my being and my essence that he wanted me to change and lead me into some type of transformation. And so I started doing a lot of spiritual reading, and I was reading like Buddhist stuff, scripture, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I found within that I uncovered the mystical tradition within Catholicism that I didn't know about before. This deep spirituality and seeking this kind of like intimate relationship with God, which we're all invited into. And some of us have better, he gives us more or less glimpses of it. And I think maybe he showed me some of that because that's what I needed, because I wouldn't have changed otherwise unless I'd been hit over the head with a spiritual baseball bat, And so the Carmelites are kind of at the heart of that. A lot of the Carmelite saints like Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Saint Therese of Lisieux, these like deep spiritual masters and mystics, and so their writings really just spoke to me, and I felt like how God was leading me.
And I guess on that topic of plans flourishing and impact, this idea of great Catholic entrepreneurs, we were talking before this, and I loved you were mentioning like people spend all this time studying business leaders who founded a business that lasted 100 years or something, and it's like, dude, we have saints and founders, entrepreneurs in a sense, who founded religious orders that are 1,000 years old, right, that we're just going to pretend like that's not worth studying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are libraries of like business or books on leadership, business leaders, sports coaches, and political figures, and books that like identify their common characteristics, and but what about a lot of these people, like they're in office for 8 years, or they they build a business that lasts 50 years, which is actually very long for businesses.
Yeah.
Most businesses don't make it past 5, and but what about people that have launched things that have lasted 500 years, 1,000 years, and impacted millions and millions of people, sometimes even billions, like the saints, like these saint founders. And so I became very interested in like what were their common characteristics and what led them on that path, and how they ultimately build things that stand the test of time and change history in many ways. People like Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuits, still on 500 years later. He went to Jesuit high school. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who nearly everyone in the world knows who she is, right? And has impacted hundreds of millions, probably more. What are their common characteristics? So I did this kind of exploration of 50 saint founders who had launched new orders or movements in the church, trying to understand their common characteristics. And I started that as part of my theology thesis when I was in seminary, and it's kind of spilled over and kind of led me on to the work that I'm doing now, working with Catholic founders and entrepreneurial leaders. I think these are the types of people that can help impact and renew faith in our time, but also can impact broader culture and society.
Amen. And you mentioned that in that study, you basically boil this down to 6 characteristics of the greatest entrepreneurs in human history, the saints. These 6 things that they boiled down to.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into during this conversation, is what are these 6 characteristics. We can take it step by step, 1 through 6, and just break down what these things are.
So in that research, which was a while ago now, so I have to refresh my memory a little bit on it, but there were kind of, and if other people study this, they might pick out different characteristics, but I kind of found 6 characteristics of these leaders. One, they're seeking God first. They seek God first before everything else. And an indicator of that is that they, on average, spend about 10 years after their kind of conversion experience where they're getting into it. It's about 10 years before they actually found what they're going to found. They don't just let me start this thing. It's like, no, there's a deep preparation period before so really seeking God first in their lives.
And I feel like that makes a lot of sense of I feel even a secular business person would be like, if your foundation isn't good, don't even bother going into your enterprise. So that seems to follow that, if your relationship with God isn't super solid, then don't start this crazy new thing that you're going to look into doing.
Yeah. And usually they're not planning to start something. They're just they feel God's leading them on to a deeper relationship with Him, and they enter a monastery, or they they're starting their kind of deeper conversion of their life, and then later on they're kind of almost invited into start. It's not like they're They usually don't like whiteboard these big ideas. And that's another characteristic too, is they often address needs in their midst in a very organic way. So they'll see some small need in a person around them and they'll start to address it. So an example of that would be Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She was actually spent over 20 years as a teacher and a school administrator. And in Calcutta, with a missionary order called the Sisters of Barreto. But she was seeing people dying in the gutters around her in the 1940s. There was just a lot of poverty in that time, and she just felt moved to go help them. And so she asked permission to, on her day off, Sunday, to go bring medicine, bring a smile, bring rice to some of these extremely poor people. And so she was doing that for years, actually, before she had this kind of mystical experience where she felt God was inviting her to come be my light to the poorest of the poor, to come do that work kind of full time. But she was addressing the needs she saw in a very organic way before that. She was faithful in little things and was invited to something deeper. And you see that very consistent in these leaders. There's like some need that they see in their midst. I think it's cool. Like, Mother Teresa was a school teacher and an administrator, and like what little need do you see in your midst? Maybe it's a kid in your classroom that needs something, is really struggling in something, or the kid on the playground looks dejected in the corner, whatever it is. Like, what is that small need in your midst, and how can you just listen to God and address it in some way, and like trust that that's going to lead you onto a deeper and deeper mission that is going to be fruitful in your life.
And that seems to tie in really well with, because those are kind of things 1 and 2 of like a firm foundation of your relationship with God and then the organic need.
Yeah.
But you can't fulfill the organic need before you have the willingness and the relationship with God to give him like hundreds, if not thousands, of periodic little yeses, building up to this one big calling. Like in this Mother Teresa example, like without her firm foundation of her relationship with God, she couldn't have given him the thousands of yeses every time she went out to serve those poor people that kind of flexed that muscle of saying yes to the Lord that ultimately led her to founding this religious order that was clearly the will of the Lord because she was so in tune to doing his will. Yeah. So those things almost seem to be synonyms of like doing the Lord's will in little ways before you try and do it in big ways. Which is synonymous with like building up a foundation with God, is like learning how to say yes to every next thing that's good and letting that lead you on the path. Because I feel like we have a culture or a mindset nowadays that's like looking for the next big thing. That like our head's always on a swivel. We always want like this big moment or this big thing. But the Lord is often calling us to do these things in little ways. Like you mentioned in the classroom, is like the Lord might not be calling you to do some crazy big thing at your school. He probably is calling you to love someone in one small particular way any given day that he's inviting you to say yes to.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's like, and that was part of Mother Teresa's spirituality too, which was rooted in, Saint Therese of Lisieux. It goes back further in the tradition, but it's like, do little things with great love, right? Do little things with great love. What is some small, because and she also said, none of us are called to, similar version of that. None of us are called to great things. We're called to little things, but with great love. And it's through those little things with great love that you actually encounter greatness. Because if you do that day in and day out in consistency, that's actually greatness. That's true greatness, and true holiness is true fulfillment of one's life. And interestingly, you look at like great business leaders too, or anyone that's been like, I guess, super successful in a worldly sense, and it's often similar. Like look at the great athletes like LeBron James. It's like, or Michael Jordan. Like it's those quiet, hidden extra free throws in the gym, day in and day out. It's like giving your all in the drill at practice that, and there's obviously like DNA, like these guys are very athletic too and natural gifting, but so I think for all of us, it's like, what are the little things today, this hour that I can do? And that's going to, and just trust that's going to set me on the trajectory that is going to be fulfilling in my life. So, and it's helpful psychologically too. It's like, okay, this morning, how's this morning going to be awesome? How can I reach the kids with the way I teach? How can I teach with joy? How can I teach with kindness and a smile? Maybe it's with discipline in the appropriate way, like this morning. And you do that this morning, you do that this afternoon, you do that the next morning and the next afternoon. And like pretty soon you're going to be like the greatest teacher of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing you can ever do is the next right thing. Like I can't do God's will this afternoon right now. I can only do God's will right now.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna try and reach before that. Like I can't. Yeah, I can't enact His will for me next week today.
Right.
I just need to do His will for me today. I remember there's a homily I've probably mentioned on this podcast. There's a homily I heard a while ago about the martyrs. That like what made the martyrs so great, or what makes the martyrs so great, is not necessarily that they just died in that moment. It's that their death there pointed to the deeper reality that at any given moment, they were willing to give God everything they could in that moment. Which in that way, like right now, we could have the same posture as martyrs. Like you and I can love the same way a martyr loves. They were just called in that moment to give their life. We could be called to give any other number of things, but a total willingness to give whatever that is could match up that posture, which seems like a very similar idea of like being a martyr in the sense of like, I'm willing to do whatever you want, Lord, is like step one of founding an enterprise that is of His will and that is for Him.
Yeah, I mean, like, going back to the sports analogy, Michael Jordan shooting free throws in the gym, like that, you get it. It becomes so ingrained in muscle memory that when you comes to the clutch at the end of the game, you're able to make it.
Yeah, it's like I made the shot 1,000 times on Tuesday. I can do it now.
Yeah, and so the confidence comes with it. And I think, like for other aspects of our life, like in going back to like wanting to accomplish great things and do great things, I think most of us have that intrinsic desire in us, and so. But it's building up that muscle memory of just doing like, the smile to the kid when it's difficult, or correcting someone when you don't want to, but it is the right thing to do, and just trust that God's going to lead us into whatever that is for.
Yeah. So step one is a firm relationship with God. Step two is it comes from an organic need. What's next on this list?
Yeah. And then, I mean, another aspect of them that's really interesting is I say like be whole, like be whole, be complete. They're holistic in terms of like. So I spent a month volunteering with the Missionaries of Charity, which is the order that Mother Teresa founded. Before I entered the monastery, I went out there for a month in Calcutta and just like shadowed them basically. And I thought before I went, I was like, man, these sisters, like they take care of the poorest of the poor, like people that are literally dying in the gutters. And I was like, they're just like praying and working. That's all they do. Like they just like, they pray and then they go work and take care of the poor and then they sleep and that's it. But what I found is like, actually, like if you look at their schedule, it's very integrated. It's a very whole way of living. So they have time for prayer in the morning a lot, like over an hour and a half. And then they're working out with the poor, but they're probably only working like maybe 7 hours a day. Just interestingly, it's the school day, and at least it was when I don't know what it is now, but probably about that. But then they also have time and then when they're done with work, they have their community time. So they'll like spend time having dinner together in the community. They'll have some recreation together. They take time. They often have a nap in their schedule. They get to bed by a certain time, so they're recovered for the next day. So there's like an integrated, like they have this healthy community relationship. They have strong boundaries around it. When work is done, they're like, nope, it's done. And they're back in the community by a certain time. And so that integration of like their spiritual life, healthy community relationships, intense focused work, but also boundaries on it. And then some approach to kind of personal wellness, like Mother Teresa wouldn't even let them, fasting is a good, and we were just talking about this earlier, it's Lent now, but like she would not let them fast when they were working for the poor because she wanted them to have the energy to serve them well, and so there's this like approach to what their personal wellness is, how they take care of themselves to show up well for others. And it's just very integrated. So I was very surprised by that, but you see that pretty consistently in the lives of the saints, this focus on wholeness.
How would that idea of a holistic approach apply to an entrepreneur or perhaps an educator? What would that have to do with
I think it's a similar thing. Anthropologically, God's designed us in certain ways. So like, I think it's pretty similar. It's like we all need these 4 buckets in our lives every day. One is prayer and spirituality. We need to have a relationship. It goes back to the first principle, our relationship with God is a foundation, and He's going to pour into us through that. 2, we're called to work. there's some exceptions to that, right? But if you're older, disabilities, something like that. But like most of us called to work, and we find our flourishing and our fulfillment in some ways through that. And so like how to work well with focus, with attention, with in healthy ways. We also need we're designed for community and relationship. So we need community, and whether that's your family or if you're single, like healthy community relationships, how do you build that into your day? And so often that's in the evening too, right? Like to have dinner with your family, or, hey, I'm going to make it a special point instead of like scrolling on social tonight, as if I'm single, to like get dinner with some friends who really build me up and help me to be a better version of myself. And then personal wellness. How do we think about like taking care of ourselves in a healthy way? Like make sure I get the sleep to show up well for the students during the day. Like, am I hydrated? Like, am I eating well? I mean, if I'm eating certain things that I can't focus as well, then that's not what God wants for me. He wants me able to be like, so all those things can like reinforce each other in a holistic way. And you see that in these saint founders, like they've got a game plan for all those categories, and we do too.
So it's more of a personal posture that flows into the ministry rather than a piece of advice or a common thread of the thing itself.
Yeah, I think like if you look at their horarium, most of the stuff in the religious life is like, or for these founders, like they schedule it, right? I got an hour and a half for prayer in the morning. Boom. I'm working 7 hours a day, and these are scheduled in. But I've got like I'm gonna be focused. I'm gonna be focused and intentional with the work and do well for the glory of God. I have time for my community life every day. So like maybe that's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours a day for spending time with others who build me up. Hey, I'm going to get to bed by a certain time in the evening, and that's like part of my personal wellness routine. I'm going to have, these meals at these times, and they're going to be healthy meals that help me to work well and stay focused. So it's often scheduled into their day, these 4 building blocks, of prayer, work, community, and personal wellness.
Okay. So build a firm foundation of the Lord, then comes from natural need. Then they have to be whole. They have to really get everything right. You can't just slave yourself away over one thing.
Yeah, you're not just like working all the time. You're not just praying all the time. You're like, it's an integrated thing. And that allows, like, look at Mother Teresa, allowed her to sustain, that's what allowed her to sustain, I would argue, to sustain the mission over decades. Like working for people that are dying in the slums of Calcutta is like, that's like a high burnout job.
Yeah, it's hard work.
Getting paid nothing.
Yeah.
Like living in 120 degree heat with no fan, like 99.99% of people just burn out like in a week or a year, right? But she's doing it over her whole life. How? Yeah. Because of these other elements are built in to help her sustain things over a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like this is all coming together and building this kind of house of everything. What would be the fourth attribute?
Yeah. So another one that's really interesting is that they often emerge kind of at the margins in unexpected places and situations. So yes, you have like guys like Francis of Assisi. That's like he's in this kind of smaller town, Assisi, and it's so he kind of helped renew the faith, renew the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages when it was going through a very difficult time. And but he was just some random guy in this town wandering around wearing a sack. Basically, he wore a sack with a rope around it, And who would have called that? You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's Mother Teresa. And she's like renewing our understanding of faith and charity from this, non-Catholic, non-Christian city in India. And so it's very much on the margins. Jesus himself was very much on the margins. He was born in a manger, in a stable, in, a random outpost of the Roman Empire at the time. And so that's actually, interestingly, part of how the Spirit renews the church is like at the margins. And so just, and the cool thing is like, we're all on the margins in some way or another. Like none of us are at the core, at the center of the action, but God is inviting us to lead the renewal of our own lives, to lead the renewal of our families, our schools, from where we are in our tiny random outposts.
How would you say, like, what is there to draw from that as someone looking to just be a disciple?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is that insight that like all of like that these leaders that help build these things that last for centuries and centuries are often at the margins of society, at the margins of, and so all of us, regardless of where we are, what place we are, we're in the right place at the right time. We're exactly where we need to be to let God lead us into the next step.
Amen.
And a lot of times that's staying where we are. Sometimes he may lead us to a change or something else, but let him lead you into that instead of forcing it. And trust that where you are is the place that he's going to lead you into pretty awesome things.
Yeah. I mean, there's someone, I heard a talk, and he basically was like, raise your hand if you wish you had been born in Jesus' time. Or raise your hand if you wish you had been born maybe during the Protestant Reformation, you could have fought. Like, raise your hand if you wish you could have been in a crusade. Like, raise your hand if you think that right now is the best possible time that you could exist. Like, a few raise their hand. And he was like, one, like this is almost like, he said this almost auxiliary to the idea of like, you're where you're supposed to be, God's providence. Secondarily, being a Catholic right now is sick. Like, what other generation has had the opportunity to reach the entire world with the click of a button, be able to have this big of a community, get places easily? The fact that a plane exists gives us such a privilege as disciples. It's like, there's so many things about today that's like, dang, we live in a sick time to be in the vineyard, to be working with and for and in the church, whether we're in the secular world or in overtly Catholic roles. It's still like you work with the church if you have a job, even, where it's like, to be able to do that nowadays is, it's very exciting. And there's a lot of like, there's a lot of attack, I think, done to make us think like, all right, like, I'm not Ignatius. Like, I'm not saying St. Francis of Assisi, but it's like, this, by all accounts, this dude was like a lunatic. He was walking around some tiny small town in a sack with a rope. Yeah. And nowadays you'd be like, dude, who is that crazy guy? But instead, from there, he changed the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And so true for all of us. And I think also too, like, whether you're optimistic about today or pessimistic, because like, you're pessimistic about the state of the faith in the church, or you're pessimistic about political things or culture or whatever it is, it's actually when things are the most challenging and difficult when the greatest heroes, the greatest saints arise. Amen. So, and it's similar, like, look at the markets. Like, you don't want to buy a stock when it's really high. You want to buy it when it's low and get in. So like, so how can you turn the narrative around when things are like seem bad from your subjective vantage point and see like, no, actually this is a great time to go for it and be the person that God's inviting me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Go all in on the dip. That's funny. Yeah. Okay. So that was kind of aspect number 4, maybe.
Yeah.
Where we were.
Yeah. And so like another one is like, they have a deep knowledge of themselves and the world around them. So they're deeply aware of themselves, who they are, and they're surprisingly in touch with the world around them. You'd think like people that are like, in monasteries or religious, they're like, they're out of touch. They don't know what's going on. They have like a deep, almost kind of intuitive sense of what's going on in the world around them. So an example of that would be, we talked about St. Ignatius of Loyola. He lived in the 1500s, founded the Jesuits, which, for the next 500 years built, maybe some people listening to this are in Jesuit schools, but they built thousands of schools and universities around the world. They had missions in countries like that hadn't even been named yet. Have impacted, tens, if not hundreds of millions of lives since over the past 500 years, and they're still around. And like, so he founded this thing, and at the time, most religious communities were much more like, they weren't as like on the offensive, like going out to different countries and like being sent all over the place. They were much more kind of stayed in their own little spot. Yeah. This is the 1500s, but at the time you think about like the context, like in that 1500s, the New World had recently been discovered. He's in Spain. New World had been discovered. Kind of the cool thing for young men to do at the time was like, I'm going to go to New World. I'm going to give me some gold, some land. It's adventurous. Like, it's kind of like the Silicon Valley, but on steroids at the time. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. And so he's like, he kind of taps into that zeitgeist, that like spirit of the time. And he's like, great, you want to go be a conquistador? Come join me. I'll give you all the spiritual training you need, and I'm going to send you out, and you're going to be a conquistador for souls, not just gold. And like, he builds this thing. I mean, they're growing by thousands within a few decades, and so he's deeply aware of what's going on in the broader world. And he was a military man before, and he's able to use kind of like some of that, like the understanding of order and like sending militia out, and he brings that into so being aware of the world around him, and then and also being aware of like, so he developed what's called the spiritual exercises, and it's this kind of like process of discernment and self-awareness to make decisions and kind of grow, and so he has this deep knowledge of himself and who he is and how God's designed him. And I think you see that very consistently in these leaders too. And so for us, it's like, how can I grow in knowing who I am? Because God's designed me in a way that is awesome, because that's how he's like his plan. And so how can I grow in continuing to know myself so that I can grow closer to him, and I can grow closer in serving others by knowing myself? St. Teresa of Avila, who founded the Carmelites in the 1500s, once said, she told her sister, she was like, sister, these are Carmelite, these are nuns, they're cloistered nuns. Even if you're raised to the heights of heaven, like, let's say, like, even like basically if like you're a saint or you're like super just close to God, and she's like, even if you're like basically in heaven, like, I want you never to relax your growth in self-knowledge. You always have more to learn about yourself, because it's in learning about ourselves and who we are that we actually can build that relationship with God and others more. And so this is like this deep psychological awareness that these leaders have.
Mm-hmm. I like this idea of like, you need to be in the world, not of it, but to pinpoint it so much on these great founders. I think especially nowadays, like in a world that feels so nasty, like it just feels so riddled with muck, that you want to, it almost feels like the correct thing to like completely shun it, because there's just so much darkness. But it's like, you can only do that so far. Like, you need to know what's going on around you so that you can minister to. I mean, it'd be like if you're a doctor who's scared of sickness. It's like, no, you need to know what sickness is. You need to know what this person has so that you can go out to them and help them. Like, you can't possibly help people around you if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. And I think I think that's right. Like, not to be, and there's like a balance in all these things. I mean, you can be so like obsessed with like watching the news and what's going on, and like you let it affect you and you live in fear or whatever else. And so, I think there's a discernment for like what that actually looks like in people's lives. But at the same time, like, to have an awareness of where culture is, where some things that may be going on historically in our time, to have a perspective on it, because like that's one way in which you're gonna. I mean, we are in the world. We're we're born and live in a place, in a time, and so not to be completely separated or isolated from it. The interesting thing is, though, that we often can learn more about the world around us by deepening our spiritual life and our prayer life. So by building our relationship with God and growing in prayer with him, it gives us more clarity, I think, to see what's going on in the world for what it is. To not just like take in whatever like someone's trying to sell us on in media, or some fad or whatever. We're actually able to like have a deeper perspective on what is really going on in the world, because we have clearer eyes to see it. And you see that in these leaders and how their vision has been transformed, so they can glean from the world what is helpful for leading their ventures or for impacting it too. Yeah.
What advice would you have for getting to know yourself better? Because I feel like I always hear that phrase.
Well, what does that actually mean?
It always frustrates me. I'm like, it feels like such a nothing bomb. Like, what do you mean know myself better?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think it's in like super practical things. For example, like, okay, let's say I'll use myself as an example in this case. So like, we were talking about this earlier too. Like, I've always had a lot of energy. I never slept really well. And I've learned that about myself. Like, I just don't sleep that great, but sleep's important to be able to function during the day and not like get on people's nerves and like get stuff done. So I have to be very vigilant about like things during the day to be able to sleep well at night. So I need to get some exercise. I'm not drinking caffeine in the afternoon. There's certain dietary things that I know help me sleep better. I have to have a wind down routine at night. Like, all these things, so that I can like show up well for the things that God is calling me to do. Right? That would be an example. So it's usually like super practical things, right? Like, what like, okay, I know I struggle with like, maybe I'm gonna use a hypothetical example now. I struggle with certain like cravings for certain foods that aren't really good for me. And I have a tendency of going to eat those. I know that about myself. And I know that, and you think about what's the goal. If the goal is like like loving others, serving others, which is the goal of the Christian life, is like love and charity.
Yeah, man.
What is how do I do things in my life that help line up to that goal? You know? And so like sleeping well for me helps me do that better. Mm-hmm. Right? So I need to do little things during the day so that tee me up for success for sleep. If I like struggle with eating this sweet or this food, and it makes me groggy and I can't like be present to others, or I'm always thinking about it when I'm like, I need to find a way of like not having that in the house, you know, or like whatever, right? Or like keeping it out of mind, or like using Lent as an opportunity to detach from it. If I struggle with a certain vice or a sin, like what are the things, like how do I avoid the occasion of that in my life? Like how do I like not just like, yeah, kind of avoid the occasion, but like I'm going to like really go the extra mile and like maybe I have addiction to social. And so I like, okay, or some account, whatever, like I get it off my phone. And, you know, so like that like, what is the goal? And how do I do little things that help me to like point my life more directly towards that goal?
Yeah. Amen.
And we're all different. Like we all struggle with different things, and we're all good at different. And then the gifts that's on the negative side. And the positive side is like, wow, God's given me these gifts. I love, you know, I'm good at, for me, like I'm good at starting things and building them, and I really like doing it, and that's a gift. And so how do I lean into that and allow myself to do those things? And there's shadow sides to that too, like where you have trouble staying focused, and and so like you also have to like curb the shadow sides with it. But like think about like to practically make it like, what are the gifts that God's given you in the areas that he wants to blossom in your life? How do you allow yourself to pour more into those? And then the things that keep you from those gifts and from loving and serving others in your fulfillment, how do you start to continue to mitigate those and shave those off so that you're most directly pointed to your true purpose, which is loving yourself actually in a healthy way, loving God and loving neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's a lot more
tangible,
practical. Yeah, like tangibly.
It's all practical stuff. Yeah.
It sounds more just like being in tune with the input-output cycle of your life more than anything. And then lastly, this sixth thing. What is this final?
Yeah, I mean the sixth thing is like, I mean maybe it's more of a observation but these leaders, they go through, which we all will. There's suffering. Their suffering is a part of it. And that's Jesus, promises to the cross. Like all of us are going to have the cross in our lives. I don't care who you are, whether you're religious or not, you're going to have suffering and challenges in your life. And these founders often go through it in a very kind of like a deeper way. They're invited into a deep suffering, but not as a suffering as it ends, but like that becomes part of the growth and the fruitfulness. And so those are linked together actually, is that be able to see suffering not just as something to be avoided or something that is exalted as a good in of itself, but is actually part of the growth and the fruitfulness that God is inviting from our lives. Because when, from the Christian understanding, like suffering and the cross are united with the resurrection. Those are one in Jesus's salvific act and so in life. And so those can be united together in us too, when we kind of conform ourselves to him. And so, okay, practically, again, what does that look like? What's an example of that? It can be like a physical or it can be a spiritual suffering. Mother Teresa of Calcutta had for almost 50 years what's called the dark night of the soul. At least we believe that's what it is, where she actually, from the majority of the time she was a missionary of charity, she was doing her ministry, she did not have a deep sense of God's presence. She felt God's absence. She felt like God was very distant. She had this like longing and emptiness internally, like kind of a spiritual depression, which is crazy. And so, but she was so close to him that she was living out her life of charity and love, not because she felt good inside, but out of faith, because that's what she believed God was asking her to do. And you see the incredible fruitfulness of that. And it can happen on a physical level too. You look at like Ignatius of Loyola, who he had been hitting a leg with a cannonball, which led to his conversion actually, because it made him actually like stop and reflect on his life instead of just going all the time. He had a lot of indiscriminate kind of fasting. He was very hard on himself, like lived in a cave for a while. And so like he had a lot of kind of health complications from that later on. So much so
he
that
had like lifelong stomach issues.
yeah, he was like, he had to like, he wanted to go traveling around all these places, but he had to work out of like a couple rooms in Rome for the rest of his life because it just like his health was like so bad. And so like all these physical things, but God can, use that. I mean, another example would be Catherine Drexel, who founded a lot of schools for blacks and Native Americans during the 40s and 50s. And she was like a go-getter and like set up these schools and travel around. And then she had a lot of some heart issues and health issues. And so for the last several decades of her life, she wasn't able to like travel or really run the community. And she just like lived out of a room. And she said that those were the most fruitful years of her life, actually, more than all the founding of the schools, et cetera, because she was able to pray for that work. And she saw more fruitfulness in the prayer of that. And so these leaders, they go through a deep suffering, spiritual and physical suffering, but there's a reality that suffering, when they're bringing Christ into that suffering, it's actually more fruitful than if they didn't suffer.
Yeah, I think it's like an uncomfortable reality to accept, but also you're going to have so much easier of a time in life if you just accept it, that like you are going to suffer. Because even as you say it, I kind of wince. I'm like, oh, you're right. Like even now I'm 21. Like I've suffered a little bit. I haven't suffered as much as I'm going to.
Yeah.
And it's like part of it's very helpful too. It's like, all right, let's recognize that now. Let's get that out of the way and let's start preparing to suffer well so that fruit can be brought from it. Yeah. But the other side of that coin is like, it's just such a hard reality.
Yeah. And it's not to just gloss over and like, oh, suffer, like suffering is like tremendous, like just having a heart and empathy for when people are going through a hard time, whether that's, going through depression or struggling with something, or you go through a breakup, or, you have an accident, or you're injured, or you're sick, like the tremendous empathy for that. And I don't want to glean over that those things are extremely hard. And, then the like, I guess the like spiritual ninja move is like, okay, I'm going through this suffering, but this actually can be a superpower. Like if I take this suffering, this pain, this wound, this difficulty I'm going through, and I allow Jesus into that, I allow God into that, because he went through something even worse than me. He's going to take that suffering and he's going to like do something awesome with it. And I don't know what that is, but he's going to do something awesome with it. Yeah. And ironically, through letting him in on that suffering, I'm going to be healed. I'm going to be healed through that also. And so that's something you see, this just like radical reliance and surrender to be able to not just hold on to our suffering and like go into it, but to give it to God and to let him transform it. Just like coal, when it's crushed, can become a diamond. Like let all that pressure and that intensity and that heat allow the suffering to be transformed into something glorious.
I think that's about as good of a summation of suffering as you could get. I guess to summarize it, to start from the beginning here, it is these 6 qualities of the great Catholic founders. Like, are really just qualities for any Catholic to draw from. First and foremost, a firm foundation on your relationship with God. Secondly is a natural raising up of what needs to be done. It's an organic growth.
Of meeting the need in your midst.
Meeting a need.
Yeah.
Third is, was it wholeness?
Yep.
Being whole.
Be whole. Yep.
Fourth comes from the margins.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this. Fifth, the last one was the suffering. And then the one that I'm going to get.
Knowledge of self and the world around you. Yeah. Well, I had to refresh myself even before this. So if you did great, you get like an A, I think. Yeah. You get a solid A. Yeah.
I think it's a great summary of kind of where to draw from. I feel like every one of those things, I think, has like certain things in my life even that I'm able to tie that to.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, it's
for all of us.
That's the antidote to this. That's the antidote to this. I'd invite anyone listening to take a second to think about like, where are the pinpricks? Where are the things that I'm like, oh, maybe that's what that means. Maybe that's where that goes. John, thank you so much for coming on today, by the way. This has been awesome. This is so insightful, and I'm just very appreciative for you to come onto the podcast.
Great to be here. Really enjoy the conversation. Thanks, John.
Cool. To end off the podcast, we always clap at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So we'll clap at the same time. We are out.